Hi, I'm Phil Kessel. I want to show you something that I like to do when I'm developing e-learning, either CD-ROM, web-based, or using Captivate or other tools. What I like to do is look at adding depth to my content. So rather than the material just being flat boxes and content and images and so forth, I like to see if I can add a little more depth to it. Makes the screen a little more brilliant, a little more exciting, and I think the extra production inside the e-learning makes the content look a little better for the learners. Let me show you an example. Here we have a screen, a simple screen with some text, and I'll just show you if I take something like this, I would probably rebuild it so it looks a little more like this. I have a little more room for the content, make the text a little larger. You can see there's a gradient background, a textured background, and also a nice drop shadow, very subtle drop shadow across the bar that's at the top. So again, this is the previous one. To me, it's very flat. There is a bit of a texture at the top with a drop shadow, but this is what I would actually look to build, and so I think it looks a little bit nicer. And I want to show you how do you build this little textured background. So I'm going to go inside of Photoshop, create a new image, and I have the settings already in here. So I have the width at 1928, which is the size of my screen, by 1040, and then the resolution I have at 72 pixels. That's what the screen resolution tends to be on most desktops. So I'm going to go with that as my setting and click on the Create button. So here it is with a transparent background. And I'm going to choose my gradient tool. So the gradient tool, if it's not selected, chances are you have the paint bucket tool in there. So I'm going to just click and hold down and select the gradient tool. Now if you click on the gradient bar up at the top or in the middle of it, it brings up the gradient editor. And this allows you to change what you want the gradient to look like. So I have a few that have been saved in here. I can click on this stop button if I want, click on the color button. Now using the color picker, I can pick and choose what color I'd like. Down here is the hexadecimal value of the color that I currently have. I click on this color, stop. Again, I can click on this and say, you know what, I'll make that just a little bit darker. So as I'm making the changes, you can see in the preview what that new color looks like compared to the current color. I'll click OK, I like that. You can add other color stops if you like, and then go ahead and change them. I don't necessarily want that, so I'm going to just click on that and pull it off. But it works quite well and makes a very nice smooth gradient. Now we have different gradients up here. Typically what I tend to use is either the radial or the linear gradient or the radial gradient. That's what I use most of the time. The linear gradient, if we take a look at it, if I draw a line like this on an angle, you see how it starts off dark and goes to light. If I draw a very short line, now all of a sudden that gradient is very crisp. Even shorter line is even sharper. And I draw it a bit of an angle. So whatever angle I draw it on, you're going to see it. Radial gradient, I can draw it like this. You see how I start off with a dark spot and then goes to light on the way out. I can start off, for example, up here in the workspace and draw across this way. So now you'll notice that it's fairly dark over on the right hand side, but on the left hand side it's a lot lighter. And this is probably the gradient that I'm going to use, because on the right hand side is where I'll put my text, but I'm going to have like a shaded box, and then on the left hand side I'll have my images. So I like to have a lighter spot for the images. Now I want to go up to the filter menu option and come down to filter gallery. This is going to bring up a whole new dialog box, and you can see in here there's a whole bunch of different kind of filters that we can use. I'm going to come down to the one that says texture, and out of the textures you can see the different textures that we can play with. I'm going to go to the texturizer, and under the texturizer you have a couple of different samples. There's brick, burlap, canvas. Canvas isn't too bad, I'll use that sometimes, but most of the time I want to use something like sandstone. It makes a very nice texture. So I'm going to go with the sandstone, and I'm going to click OK. So now there's my textured background rather than having just a flat background. I'm going to add a new layer over here in the layers panel down at the very bottom. Just create a new layer. I'm going to give this a name bar because I want to have a title bar going across the top. So I'll click on the marquee tool, and then I'm going to draw a marquee for where I want the bar to be. That looks good right there. And I'm going to click and hold down, and I'm going to get my paint bucket tool. And the foreground color for my paint is right here. Like I said, I like that. Okay, maybe a little bit darker. And I'm going to fill it in, and there's my color. Now what I can also do, and what I tend to do, is I'll go to the layer styles, and we have all these different styles that we can play with. And I'm just going to select the bevel and emboss right now, and it'll bring up this dialog box, and I'm just going to move it down so I can play with the settings on here and see the results. Or if I can move it off to the side like this, I can see the results as I play with this. So I've got it set to emboss. I can click on the contour, give it a really good defined emboss. Look at the cone and say, oh no, that's the wrong way. So I'm going to choose the inverted cone. That looks a little bit better. Add the drop shadow. So there's a nice drop shadow. I'm at 90 degrees. And you can see the other numbers in here that you can play with. And as you make changes to these numbers, you're going to see the changes happening live on the screen. So you get an idea of what you're dealing with, and if you like what you see. So I'm going to leave it at this, and I'm going to click the OK button. So now I'm ready to save this, and I'm going to turn off the bar, and I'm going to highlight layer 1. I don't need this marquee anymore. We'll select and deselect it. There it is. And I go to Edit, Export, and I'm going to use the old Save for Web. And the reason why I use this is because one of the things I'd like to see is this little area down here. For example, this graphic is going to be about 3 megs in size, the way it is right now, because it's a ping, a 24-bit ping. So it has 16.7 million colors in it, and I don't really need that. So I'm going to drop it down to 8-bit ping. So now that it's an 8-bit ping, and I take a look at it, it's cut it in half. It's down to 1.7 megs, so it's quite a bit smaller. So I like that. I'm going to click on the Save button, and I'll save it as background. I've already got one saved there called background. I'll replace it. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show the bar and then hide the background. And I'm going to export this. So I'll say export, export for web. Now at the top here is the original. At the bottom, you're going to see what it's going to look like when it's an 8-bit ping. Because I had the shadow on here, you'll notice now I can see this white bar. It's called ghosting. So you can see this ghosting. So I don't want to have that ghosting on there. So what I'm going to do is I have to bump this back up to a 24-bit ping. So my file size is going to go from 8,000 bytes to about 15,000. So it's almost doubled it. But it looks really nice. So I'm happy with that. So I'll save that, and I have a background bar, and I'm going to save that and replace that. So I can save this, but what I want to actually do now is I'm going to open that background bar. So this is what the background bar looks like. Actually, I'll close off the other one. I'm not going to save that, just so we're not confused. So this is the background bar.png, and what I want to do is I want to crop it. So rather than having all that extra content, I don't need that. I just want to make sure I have enough room here for my shadow, and then I'm going to click the OK. Now I can save it, and it's done. So now I can go into Captivate, and inside of Captivate, this is a screen that I was working with. And if I go to make a new slide, so what I can do is I'll go to my media, import an image, and I'll import that background. So there's the background. I can align that afterward. I'm going to go to media, import an image, and I'll get the bar. And I'm keeping the bar separate. I could save this as one, but I'm taking the bar separately because I might want to have a slide that just want the texture background. I want to have the option. So if I keep this separate, then I can easily move it around, and I don't have to worry too much about having a second screen. So the bar and the background are now separate. So now it's a matter of just putting on some text and put my image on there and so forth. And what I did with the translucent background, because I have a texture background, you do not want to have just plain text. So if I have text caption on here, and if you have plain text on a texture background, it doesn't always come through well and makes it kind of hard to read. So you might not want to do that. So what I tend to do is I will draw with my object, or sorry, my shapes, and I'll draw a rectangle, and we'll draw a rectangle, something like this. And then I will set the stroke I'll set the stroke to 0. Set the color to white, and then we'll play with the opacity, try it at 50%, and then I'll put the text on this, and it looks a whole lot better. What I probably will also do is, that's a good idea, is I'll actually move the box down a layer, so when we take a look at the screen, you can see the bar goes right across the top, and now I have a textured area where a shaded area where I can put my text on. So this is what I tend to do. It takes a few extra steps, but the production value and the way it looks is a whole lot sharper. So I hope this helps you out, and I hope your e-learning starts to look better too.